Officer fires 4 times. He fires from 3 feet behind the car, 12 feet behind the car, and then as the car turned the corner, 47 and 57 feet respectively.
Somewhere in your 30 plus years, in your experience, something might go wrong. Let us introduce you to Rick Wall, a distinguished figure with an impressive 30-year career in the LAPD. Rick's journey through the ranks included pivotal roles such as a field training officer, detective, sergeant, and ultimately reaching the esteemed position of captain. During his tenure as a sergeant, Rick played a crucial role in internal affairs, handling major cases involving officers facing criminal charges. Notably, LAPD's internal affairs at the time lacked a criminal section for such complex investigations, showcasing Rick's commitment to navigating uncharted territories. His dedication and leadership qualities led to his promotion to lieutenant, where he continued to make significant contributions. 7 years later, Rick achieved the rank of captain, bringing with him a wealth of experience and a unique perspective. As a captain, Rick faced formidable challenges within the LAPD's disciplinary system. Despite blowbacks in a couple of internal affairs investigations, Rick consistently maintained a reputation for fair, impartial, and reasonable adjudications. His commitment to upholding justice and navigating complex situations sets him apart as a seasoned professional in law enforcement. Welcome to Internal Affairs, a police podcast. Let's go. Okay, so we're going to go Rick Wall to Lieutenant Wall to Captain Wall to Chief Wall. You know, such an achievement. We have so much to talk about. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing some of your stories as it relates to internal affairs, and we'll get right to it. But let's go with the what I'm going to ask you. So on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being the highest, right? Please rate the importance of internal affairs in a police department and why.
It's a qualified 10.
Qualified 10.
And because in large agencies like LA, and I've been at 3 different departments. I've had my own, internal investigations. When I had a 20-person department, things are done differently.
Right.
You don't have an internal affairs department. You have a process. Right, and it's important to make sure that your people are trained. But the goal of internal affairs is to make sure that you maintain the public trust that we're doing it right, and that it maintains the officer's trust that should an allegation of misconduct come up, that it's going to be properly investigated and they're going to be treated fairly in the process.
Yeah, that's definitely, I couldn't agree with you more. Look, every time I ask for the rating or the scale, it's kind of hard not to, when I'm starting to realize that I suppose we should start with a 10, right? And depending on your experience, I mean, I haven't gotten 1 yet. Maybe in the future I will. Will someone say, no, it's a 5? And let me tell you the reasons why. It is super important because you're right. At the end of the day, and this is just me, and you can kind of piggyback on this, is any type of function, whether it's tactical, operational, administrative, somewhere in your 30 plus years in your experience, something might go wrong, or someone did something wrong, and guess what?
When I was a police officer, I had a sergeant, a great guy, and he said, when we were talking about personnel complaints, he says, a personnel complaint has an element of truth. It has a basis of truth. Something happened that the person feels wronged. Now, how that may get embellished or twisted or contorted or just, changed is going to be as different as anything. But there's always a basis of truth, and you have to understand that something in there happened, and something went badly or went wrong. Yeah. And now someone's got a bone to pick.
Right. And or someone said, hey, I think you did something wrong, and it could be that you never did.
Right.
Yeah, totally. Finish the sentence for me. As an internal affairs investigator, my job is to
find out what happened. I mean, there's like I said, there's that element of truth. Something happened, but you got to get in there. You got to start asking the questions. You got to start going out and doing stuff. And you can't just sit and wait for them to come to you. You know, I can tell you of times where we had one involving a canine, where a guy said that the 2 officers held him down and the handlers sicked the dog on him.
Okay.
And obviously the officer's like, no, that's not what happened. Everybody agreed there was a transient that saw the whole thing. And my partner and I went out every night from midnight to 3 in the morning to this neighborhood where he'd been seen for a week. That was our plan. On day 3 we found him, and that's going to go good or bad. Did you see what happened? Yes, I did. What happened? Took him into custody. As he's walking to the car, he turned, he kicked the dog, and the dog bit him in the leg.
Yeah.
Now, he very easily could have come back the other way and said, yep, they held him down, and the dog, and
Exactly.
we got a bunch of people in trouble.
But I think what's more important, and just like our previous guest that we had, is it just seems as though sometimes at the intake or whatever, we just feel like we're not doing a really 100% service
Right.
to the officer, and that's so. Gosh, that's what I like to call half-baked.
Yeah, it is.
And that sucks, because that's not, especially as a field sergeant, because
Right.
you are going to take intakes. What's your thoughts?
No, I agree that, you know, the field sergeants want to be one of the guys. They don't want to be the guy that's, you know, that's seen as the bad guy, right? He's writing a face sheet.
Yeah.
Well, he's writing a face sheet because the department requires him to. But do your people right. Get their statements. Find the witnesses. Find all those things, because they're not going to be there a week or 2 later.
I got an interesting question for you, Chief, as it relates to the duties and responsibilities about in this particular segment is, do you think that as an internal affairs investigator, you think you should have any expectations of the outcome or no?
You have hopes. You have a vision of what you would hope you're going to find, but you have to listen to all the facts. You have to look and get all the information to draw that conclusion. You're going to hear things that you're going to go, oh, damn, I really wish you hadn't said that. Right. But you said it. And at the same time, then they're going to say something that you didn't expect, that you're going to go, oh, really? Tell me more about that, because that's going to help your officer.
Right. Exonerate him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or clear him, or unfounded.
Yeah, right. It never occurred. That's so true. And I asked that because one of our previous guests kind of threw that out there, like, you know, you shouldn't have any expectations. And I think, and we should elaborate more, and I wanted to get your opinion about this, is that sometimes as an IO, you kind of feel like you have all this evidence, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, you know what? Oh, yeah, this is going to be sustained, or this is going to be. So it's almost as if when you read the face sheet at the intake level, right, you just feel like, oh, you know, I'm expecting this to be either it did happen or it didn't happen. And I don't think that's kind of healthy to do.
Especially when you go back to your previous question about the flaws in the intake process. You know what you've seen them. You've seen what these are. You know that it's going to have gaps. So you just got to sit back and say, okay, this is my framework from which I'm starting, and we're going to move on. How many times in the advocate section did you find something that came in as an allegation, and later on that allegation was unfounded, but we found out that this guy's doing all these other things?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yes.
And I'm talking criminal stuff.
Oh,
and
no,
you're just
absolutely.
Like, oh, yeah, that didn't come out well.
No, that didn't come out well.
Completely out of left field.
Yeah, no, totally. I appreciate that. Okay, let's take a trip down memory lane. Yours is a little extensive, of course.
39 and a half years.
39 and a half years. Wow. Let's see. Class of 5 of 1981, right?
581.
Okay. Were you going to make it before 5, or how did that happen? Did you get a letter, or?
I got a phone call.
You got a phone call?
Literally, my class started 5/26/81, May 26th, the day after Memorial Day.
Wow.
I got a call on Friday. I was living in San Diego. I was working at a job. I got a call at my job, and it's saying, hey, we had a cancellation. Are you available to start in the academy class that starts on Tuesday? And I said, yes. And
What
I
did you
turned
tell
to
your
my
boss
boss
if you
and
don't
said,
know?
well, they knew I was processing. So I turned to my boss and said, hey, the balloon just went up. I'm out of here. Went home, called my my girlfriend that I was living with at the time. Went home, packed up, drove up to Los Angeles. My grandmother lived in Los Angeles. So I moved in with my grandmother for a couple weeks until I could had a weekend to go find an apartment, and drove up here on Memorial Day from San Diego and started my academy class the next morning.
Well, I bet that boss was kind of a little upset you didn't give him a 2-week notice.
No, they were really cool. They tried to keep me and tried to offer me promotions and stuff to stick around, but I said, 20 years from now, I'd hate to say, I wonder what would have happened if. I got a chance to do something that I think is going to be pretty cool. And my God, I look at the stuff I was able to do.
Oh, yeah.
Just going to places and going to different countries with the department, and then, things that people look at, the riots, the Pope, the earthquake, the DNC. I mean, these are things that guys, oh yeah, I've heard about that. I've read about that.
Yes.
Dude, I was there.
Yeah, you were. Which brings me to you made a field training officer, right? A police officer 3 in 1985.
Yep.
And you did that for, I suppose, about a year or so. And then you kind of made detective right before you made sergeant.
Yeah.
You made detective in 87 and 88, somewhere around there. And lo and behold, you make sergeant in 1991. And I kind of want to focus a little bit about on your assignment or your promotion to sergeant, because at that time, 1991, I suppose the year after is 1992, the riots. Where were you on the day of the verdict? How did that go down?
So firstly, when I promoted, I deferred making sergeant.
Okay.
Because I wanted to have a year in as a detective, so I would have dual status.
Yes.
And then a freeze came down.
Okay.
And so it was a hard freeze, no promotions.
Oh, really?
And I'm like, damn. And so the day all of a sudden they lifted the freeze for 1 month, and there were 12 of us. All of us were detectives at narcotics division. All went from D1 at narcotics to Sergeant 1 someplace in patrol.
So your number was up during that freeze.
We were right there, and all of a sudden they took that freeze off for a month, which was just enough time for us to promote. And then it was a hard freeze for another 8 months.
I was going to say, I'm curious, if you didn't make it, you would have had to wait another 8 months?
Yeah. The list died.
Oh, really?
It was going to have to take the test again. So I was all signed up to take the test. The freeze came off, and I went, I don't have to take the test. Day of the riots, I was teaching a class. I was off. I was on an overtime gig teaching a class at the academy when the verdicts came.
Okay.
We saw the verdicts on the TV, said, well, I guess we're done in class because no one's going to focus on anything we're talking about. Went home, turned the TV on. It was starting. Phone started ringing. I left a message on my answering machine that said, hey, if you're watching the news, you know where I am right now. I'm at work. I'll leave a message. I'll get back to you in a couple of days when I get home.
Right.
And that was it. And off we went to
deep, rolling 4 deep, or what was that like?
It was weird. It was we got sent down the second night. We got sent down to the command post, and we were in a bus. And from Rampart, and there were 3 sergeants, 3 squads. I was the senior sergeant, and I equate it with the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. When you're in your boat and you're going down the water, going yo ho yo, and there's things burning and people shooting and looting and people running all over the place, and you're in your boat going down the middle of the street, right? It was surreal. It was surreal.
Wow.
It was
Wow.
an interesting experience.
And interesting to know that that lasted a couple of days, and here we are, a couple of decades later, and it's just unbelievable that you would experience something like that. Not many police officers even get to even experience something like that. Well, thank you for sharing that. So now, look, we're in internal affairs in 1999.
Yep.
And we'll get back to that because we're going to talk about your role as an internal affairs investigator. You made lieutenant in 2001.
Right after 9/11.
Right after 9/11. Captain 7 years later from 2008, and you did that for 3 years, and lo and behold, you completed your 30-year career, right?
30-year probation. I was over.
It was over for you in 2011, and I know that you went into the private sector. We talked about that a little bit.
Yep.
And you made it back to it was out of state.
Yeah.
And then you made it back to back here to Los Angeles, and I know that you became chief at Cal State University of Los Angeles.
Yep.
Chief, if you don't let's focus in on internal affairs, because I know we have stories. We have stories to tell, and I really appreciate you sharing with these. Walk us through a significant incident where you were an investigator, and I'll leave the floor up to you. And
there was most of my investigations were criminal. This was before there was a criminal section.
Right, and that's very important to find out, because
and now there are people that specialize in that, but most of mine were. I had all kinds of, 246 people shooting their guns off, driving down the street drunk, and a case involving some Department of Insurance investigations, frauds, and other things. But the one that really became an interesting one was an officer-involved shooting. It was an officer-involved shooting, involved a 77th officer. The shooting actually occurred in Newton Division.
Okay.
He was working vice, plain clothes, was stopped at a red light, talking to some transient on the corner. There's a guy behind him. There's no traffic. It's Lakers are playing.
Okay.
Right? Everybody's gone. Their officer and the transient are talking about the Laker game. Light turns green. Guy behind him yells, "Come on, move your car." He doesn't. Light goes yellow, light goes red, light goes green again. The guy yells, "Move your car" again. He doesn't. So the guy just, heck with it. He passes him, goes around, and makes his left turn. Officers decide they're going to stop him and write him a ticket.
Okay.
It's like, okay. So plain clothes, they pull up alongside, badge him. Long story short, the cars pull up. The guy gets out, the officer gets out, and the guy's, just chipping at him. Now, this guy is a former Black Panther.
Okay.
He's been to prison. He's been to prison for attempted murder. He knows the game. And he's got this young officer, and he's just chipping at him. And things like, "Hey, does that radio work? Can you call a real police officer to come out here and write this ticket? Because you have no idea what you're doing." I mean, just needling this kid.
Okay.
Ultimately, the investigation found that what had happened was, at one point, the officer hands him his ticket. The guy starts his car. They have a verbal argument about something. The officer opens the door, grabs the guy's arm to pull him out of the car. The guy snatches his arm back. His watch drops off his arm right there. The officer reaches for his gun. Guy says, this guy's going to shoot me. He accelerates away. As he accelerates away, the officer fires 4 times. He fires from 3 feet behind the car, 12 feet behind the car, and then as the car turned the corner, 47 and 57 feet respectively. The first round went through the passenger window behind the driver's seat, through the driver's seat into his back. Second round went through the back window of the car, between the 2 seats, into the floorboard. The third and fourth round were fired as he was driving away. At the time, robbery homicide handled officer-involved shootings.
Okay.
They didn't have this pre-CIID, which is, and then which preceded FID, Force Investigation Division. Robbery homicide gets out there, they're doing their thing, and they're like, "This is bad. This is bad." The SID does their thing. They brought SCID, which is a specialized collision investigation detail. They do the tire tracks so they can, as the guy's accelerating away, so they knew exactly the course that he took. They clean everything up. They go home. Next morning, I get a call from my captain saying, "Hey, I need you to meet me at robbery homicide. Something's up." "You got it, boss." So I get to RHD, meet with the captain from RHD, meet with my captain, and informed, "Okay, here's what happened. We have the shooting. And by the way, it's yours." Because the department policy says that if there's a problem, RHD would turn the shooting over to internal affairs.
Okay.
Like, well, it would have been kind of nice to get the call last night so I could have seen what the scene looked like last night, but it is what it is.
Right.
So we end up having to go out and recreate the scene. A lot of interesting things happen. So we're going to go recreate the scene. So we've got to get all the permits and stuff because we're shutting down the street and all this other stuff. I call the league.
Mm-hmm.
I call, excuse me, the officer's father-in-law was a police detective, very well respected, great guy.
Okay.
I call him up and say, hey, just FYI, we're going to go do this recreation. You might want to have an attorney or make sure he's got some representation there.
Okay.
They call the league. League says, unless there's a formal personnel complaint or he gets charged, we're not going to do this.
Right. So the union just pretty much said,
And
we're
I'm
on
like,
standby
and
until
I
something happens.
called Gary Ingemunson, who Gary and I had a great relationship. Gary was the league attorney, the main league attorney. I said, Gary, the little hidden secret on this was Gil Garcetti had been just elected. This was the very first time the DA rollout team responded to an officer-involved shooting. And now even LAPD saying this is probably going to end up criminal. This isn't going to an arrest. This is going to the grand jury.
Okay.
You need to get some people out here. And so we talked about that, and they did. So Gary brought out a couple folks. They did their thing. We reenacted the scene. We had lasers and rods and all those things, so we knew exactly where the car was. And then a couple weeks later, we took the car, because we had the car. We had it tucked away at SID.
Mm-hmm.
We went up to the Davis Academy, and we set up markers and set up the course, a driving course. We had a couple driving instructors come out and say, okay, you need to go from this point to that point as fast as you can on this curve. And then we had timers and lights and lasers and all that stuff set up so that we knew exactly how long. The defense was that as the officer was driving away, as the suspect was driving away, the victim was driving away, he was skidding. And so that's why there were shots into three sides of the car.
Okay.
But the lasers didn't support that. The rods didn't support that either. And then when we did the thing, it was a consistently 1.9 to 2.3 seconds between the second shot and the third shot. Mm-hmm. So there are the argument of just spontaneous fire, he's quiet, and then the lag time that when the threat's gone,
right,
he's still pulling the trigger, is gone.
Right.
And in fact, they brought out a whole bunch of private investigators, most of whom are former robbery homicide shooting team investigators.
Right.
And they brought out a lot of folks and a lot of resources. They were doing measurements. We gave them the car, said, you guys play with it, do what you want to do with it, drive with the thing, put your own driver in it,
yeah,
do what you got to do.
There's discrepancies.
And the bottom line was even their guys came back and says, we can't justify the thing of lag time with that delay. He's clearly tracking a moving vehicle and shooting at it.
Okay.
And so ultimately, he was indicted. Ultimately, he pled guilty. And that's where things really got kind of tragic, in my opinion. Good kid, young husband, young father, screwed up. He made a mistake. Guy lived. Guy got a paycheck from the city.
Right.
$100,000.
Oh, wow.
I would have thought it would have been a lot more, but hey,
Yeah.
that's not my thing. At one point, the DA investigators were going, okay, we want to file attempted murder. And I'm like, you don't have it. I can't prove an attempted murder. Department policy was we shoot to stop. For you to make a jump from shooting to stop to he intended to kill him,
specifically intended,
that's a leap
that's a hybrid.
in my opinion,
no, totally,
the evidence doesn't support. And as the investigating officer, I'm going to have to say the evidence doesn't support that.
Right.
Ultimately, it was agreed that he would get a county lid. He was going to be fired, he would resign, get a county lid, which is a maximum of a year in county jail. And with time served and all those formulas that they do in a county jail, he was probably going to do 90 days in county jail. And that's it. Done deal. The day of the sentencing, something went bad. and I wasn't there, so I can't say conclusively what happened, but what I know happened was the DA's office went forward and said, we're good with the county lid. His attorney said, we're good with the county lid. The probation department report came back and said 3 to 5 years. And the judge asked the defense attorney, why shouldn't I send him to prison for 5 years? And what I've been told was the defense attorney hadn't anticipated that was going to happen.
Oh, wow.
Because everybody's on agreement. Everybody's in agreement. So he ended up going to prison for 3 years.
Wow.
And the day he got out of prison, his father-in-law retired. His father-in-law obviously took care of his daughter and the grandchild. And then the day he got out of prison, the father-in-law retired and moved out of state. But just a tragic incident, but it was one of those ones that just it happened. And it's not, hey, I did this.
Right.
I was the guy that got the call.
What other lessons learned?
Well, there were a couple. The first was that that we really got to figure some of these things out. One of the things that a little side note that happened was that the historically, when an officer is convicted of a felony, then they still have their board of rights to determine whether or not going to be fired from the department.
Correct. The administrative process.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was we're not going to do this whole thing at a board of rights. So I ended up going down and getting a minute order, basically his guilty plea to pleading guilty to the felony of assault with a deadly weapon. I created a new complaint based on that. And that was just a one-shot thing. Hey, this is the charge. You've pled guilty to a felony. You can't be a police officer. And he was obviously didn't come to the thing. He was tried abstention and was terminated. But there was a lot of things that came out. There were, obviously I caught some heat from some folks because you're going to put this guy. You're the only all the LAPD shootings. You're the only one that's ever ended up with a guy going to prison. Dude, it wasn't my. I mean, we followed the evidence. We had a ton of evidence to what happened.
So they pretty much blame you as the Blue Falcon. You were the Blue Falcon.
I can tell you right now that his father-in-law still blames me for the thing, and I moved on obviously, but it was it was just one of those things, and it's tragic. But sometimes it happens. But the other piece to that is that the process works. If we have somebody who does something they're not supposed to do, and the investigation, and I wasn't the only investigator. Obviously, I was the leader, lead investigator. But you do the stuff, you find all the evidence, you get all the statements. We literally interviewed every single person. Now, the story that I communicated to you, I've left some parts out, but that about how the shooting transpired. So the guy's driving away. As he's driving away, he feels pain in his back. He puts his hand back and sees he's bleeding. So he realizes now he's been shot. So he starts to drive himself to a hospital, but he's panicking. He doesn't know where to go. By now, the helicopters picked him up. And as he's driving to try to find a hospital, he sees a black and white coming at him. He stops his car and he's leaning with both hands out the window to wave down a police car. The police car pulls in behind him. They order him out of the car. He says, I've been shot. The officer says, I know. Get on the ground. He gets on the ground. He prones out. They don't knee drop him, anything like that. They handcuff him, get him in. He tells that officer the story that I communicated, that he ultimately communicated to us. Tells that officer that story. Gets in the ambulance. Tells the paramedics the exact same story. Gets to the emergency room. Tells the doctor the exact same story. And each one ends with, tell my son I love him because I know I won't see him again. So it's almost like a dying declaration.
Yeah.
And I know there's going to be some legal leaders going to look at this and pick it apart and say, oh, you could have done this, you could have done that.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, but we did what we did.
No,
and
totally.
it was. But it was really interesting. But we ended up interviewing every officer that even responded to that officer-involved shooting scene. We, as part of this investigation, every single name that was on a crime scene log was interviewed. And that took us weeks just to get those statements out. no most that we didn't see anything. They got there, things were done. It was like that. The officer, we had to interview him, right? So I told his attorney, Ira Salzman, who had passed away.
Yes.
Great guy.
Yes, he
I
was.
called Ira and said, hey, look, we have to interview your guy. He says he's not going to make a statement. I said, I know, but we have to give him that opportunity.
Right.
So we're ordering him down to internal affairs. So he comes down to internal affairs. Ira doesn't come. Ira says, call me when you get there. So he calls. We put Ira on, the attorney on speaker.
Uh-huh.
We're doing this investigation. I need to read your rights. Do you refuse? I refuse to waive my right to remain silent. Okay, that concludes this interview.
Yeah.
We didn't lie barger him because I'm a criminal investigator at this point, and we're not going to involve that. Ultimately, I don't know if an IA complaint 128 was actually even completed. I'm sure it was. I was told it was, and I was told that they had stuff.
And correct me if I'm wrong, did you feel at the time, this was like probably, I mean, I understand it was a tragedy. It is. It's, no one wants to see definitely any police officer get imprisoned by such actions. But do you feel at the time that you were doing this investigation back in, this is what?
2000.
In 2000, this was, it was unheard of.
It was.
And so they all pointed at you like you're the bad guy for doing this.
There were some. A lot of others didn't. A lot of others understood that it was just, my number came up on the, on the Rolodex, and that was it. I was the on-call guy, and that was it. And, but yeah, it was a different experience. And yeah, you get the rat squad and all those things and all those.
Always. The dark side, the rat squad. Desk jockeys and cop haters and et cetera, et cetera. Well, thank you for sharing that. You know what? There is a lot of lessons learned from that because as you're telling me the story we sit here today, AB 392 just pops up.
Right.
It's the revamp of 835 APC. You and I both know that had that would have been today, chances are maybe the DOJ 1506 team will probably roll out because there's so much detail and there's so much talk about no stone goes unturned. I mean, you have to do righteous by just this whole process, not just by the officer, but for the entire process in it itself. And
I think though, and like I said, we played it straight down the line. I'd like to think that at every opportunity to give the officer the benefit of the doubt, we did.
Yeah.
Which may not have happened with the DOJ rollout team.
Correct.
But again, there weren't a lot of opportunities to say, hey, you're okay on this. And so it was very complex. It was the SID folks were amazing. Mm-hmm. I mean, this was the first they bought stuff. This was the first time we even used it.
Right.
Because
all the science and the
this was all new stuff, and the department's like, hey, we can't say we didn't want to fund something or get you some supplies or get you some equipment for this, and so it was a tough case on a lot of levels because, like I said, he screwed up, but he was a good kid, and
it's tragic, it happened. Okay, that was as a sergeant. Look, I do know you were a captain. In our beloved LAPD from 2008, 2011, you and I had conversations where now I want you to share your experience in the lens of an adjudicator. Because, look, it seems as though, as I'm doing more of these episodes with my guests, these are decisions that affect not just the accused employee. This affects a lot of stakeholders. That's probably the best way to describe it. Tell us about a time where you were a captain, and I know that you got this investigation, and you were ready to adjudicate this. And what can we get some lessons learned?
A couple really interesting ones. One of the things that I always go back to was when I was a detective and I went to detective school. We had someone come in from the public defender's office and talked about the job of the public defender. And we're like, oh yeah, who cares? These guys, But his comment was, and it's always stuck with me, and that is that when someone is found not guilty, justice has not been served. Because either you had someone who was truly not guilty who had to go through that whole process, or you had a person who was guilty who beat the system.
Yes.
And so those were very telling. When I made captain, my chief, a great friend, he'd been my captain in internal affairs, Sergio Diaz, amazing guy, and we were talking about the job of the captain, because this was during the Parks era.
Okay.
Initially, but actually, I came in when Bratton was. I made captain with Bratton, but during there was still a lot of holdover stuff going from the Parks era, where the
consent decree
perception was
took an effect,
going after a lot of folks. Yeah,
under Bratton.
And if you didn't make the decision that the brass thought you needed to make, captains were getting called into the chief's office and getting called to the carpet and getting chewed out. And Sergio, I remember, said, look, Sergio was from Cuba. Sergio's Cuban.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Pedro Pan, which is a long story, but those were children who were sent from Cuba to the United States. Peter Pan, children without parents, right? Lived with a foster family till his family could get out of Cuba. His dad was in jail on a couple of occasions. He was imprisoned by the Batista regime,
Mm-hmm.
and then later was imprisoned by the Castro regime as a political prisoner in both cases, because he spoke out and said, I don't. And Sergio's thing to me was, you got to do what you got to do, and you got to do what's right for you. And he goes, what worked for me was, my dad went to prison for his conscience. And worst they can do to me is not make me a captain 2 or make me a captain 3 or make me to the next level, right? They can't, that's a civil service rank. You can't fire me. I'm a captain.
Yeah.
So deal with it. So that was reassuring. So I got a case, and it was as I know some of your other guests have talked about, some of these get, I won't say politically motivated, but personal. People get personalities involved.
Of course.
And this was involved an officer who, by all counts, was a decent officer, made detective. And when you make detective, that's a civil service rank, and you have a 6-month probationary period. Well, during this period, this officer worked auto thefts.
Okay.
And LAPD has a detective case tracking system, an automated system that you do all your investigations and you track your cases, and I see it. If you investigate it continued, basically means it's not going to be backlogged. If you don't look at it for more than 30 days, a flag goes off, and you have to explain why these cases are backlogged. So she had no backlogs. Long story short, she does 3 months. Her detective supervisor and the table coordinator, the D2 and the D3, are writing her stellar ratings that she's doing a great job. She goes to another table where she's working crimes against person, and her D2 asks her to write a 314, which is a investigation follow-up in LAPD. That's 314 is the form number. And she says, what's that? I've never done one. I don't know how to do one.
Okay.
Well, come to find out, for 3 months, she'd never filled out a 314. She'd never done an investigation follow-up as required. Mm-hmm. So they try to get her going on and try to remediate her. They can't. She's just not able to grasp the concept or whatever. So they decide, okay, we're terminating her probation. She's going back to being a police officer. Okay. Then there was a clash, according to several people, between her and her lieutenant, and the lieutenant decided to make a personnel complaint that she intentionally falsified department documents. She failed to, insubordination because she failed to complete the 314s by falsifying the DCTS without the 314. It was a falsification, and moved for termination.
Okay.
Now, the personnel complaint goes with the employee. Mm-hmm. So when she's terminated from probation, she comes to my command, and as does the complaint. So my first question is, what did the D2 and the D3 say about training her?
Right.
Because they wrote stellar ratings. Yeah. Have we investigated them? Because if we're going to say that she didn't do something, we have to show that she was trained to do it.
Right. So her supervisors.
Yeah, her supervisors, and the response from the command was, you've got the investigation. We're not doing anything else. So,
were you coming up on statute out of curiosity?
Not quite.
Okay.
We had some room.
So there was time.
Yeah, there was time.
To return it back to the investigating officer.
Which I tried, and it came right back, saying it went from up through my bureau to their bureau, down and back, right up back, and said, no, you've got the investigation.
Get it done.
So now I'm like, okay. So LAPD had a category of does not rise to the level of misconduct. Mm-hmm. So I looked at this, I said, okay, this is a performance issue. It's not a misconduct issue.
Right. It's not disciplinary in nature.
She's been punished because you've terminated her probation and you've basically demoted her back to police officer.
Yeah. You can't be a detective anymore.
Yeah. So it's a performance issue. She's been remediated. She didn't take. She's been demoted. There's no malice, no intent to defraud, no intent to do anything wrong. We're done. And so that's my finding.
Okay.
And it goes back up the chain, and I get a phone call saying, we're overriding you. It's called what LAPD refers to as a military endorsement. We're going to military endorse this, and we're ordering her to a border rights for termination.
Wow.
And I retired shortly thereafter, so I don't know what the outcome was. But it was just one of those ones that it was like, things were happening. And interestingly enough, about a year later, I had a conversation with the captain at that time, the area captain, the Captain 3, who acknowledged to me later, he said, we probably should have handled that one differently. And it was like, okay, so I'm assuming at that point it had been adjudicated, or it had been thrown out or whatever.
Right. Okay, so let me just back up a little, because I got a question about the actual allegation. One of them was some fraudulent lying or something along those lines.
Intentionally falsifying department documents.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second, because I really want to get your opinion about a false statement. Because, look, we both know that preponderance is a standard of proof. Right? More likely than not, it's 51%. In your opinion, when you start looking at that particular allegation in it itself, you fought so hard for it. Why?
It's not there. It's not there. A demotion is not only a demotion in rank, it's a demotion in pay.
Yeah.
So by moving someone from a sergeant to a police officer, you've just taken 10% of their pay for the rest of their life, including their pension. Yeah. That's heavy. And it's the same with the other one that I talked about with the demotion.
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
She's already been demoted back to from detective to police officer 2. That's a heavy pay hit forever. So, it's interesting though. But like I said, you got a couple of times where we've had cases where, the Board of Rights comes back and it's a character witness comes in and says, oh yeah, he's a great guy.
Moves the needle.
And that does. It moves the needle.
Yeah, I've been there.
And that's fine.
Yeah, you got to live with that decision. Speaking of Board of Rights and hearings and being panel members, if you will, right, board members, I do know in your time as a captain, you also were chosen to be
on a couple of boards.
On a couple of boards. Can you just kind of give us your, and you know what, and before we move on to the next segment, since we are talking internal affairs, I really like to get to know, not me, but for the audience, as far as lessons learned, what can we expect when you do make a command staff officer, whether you're in a big machine like ours or even a small agency, what do we do? Or, what kind of advice can we give?
You've got to be ready to make the hard call, and you have to understand that sometimes the real hard call is that it's going to cost someone their job. The Board of Rights, the 2 I had were just completely beyond. One where we found him guilty, it was a domestic violence. Mm-hmm. When the actual incident occurred, he had just got off of a 6-month suspension for domestic violence.
Yeah.
The evidence was beyond the preponderance to show that he had done it again, and so you've been suspended for 6 months. Next one's termination. There's no way around that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And
yeah.
so he actually left. He left after and came back
In absentia.
And we ended up, for the penalty phase, it was done in absentia because he wasn't there. Come to find out, he was actually down talking to one of his buddies, an old partner who was an assistant chief, who told him, just go down to personnel and submit your retirement papers right now.
and get rid of.
And just, you're done.
That happened to me once at Bradbury Building. Same thing. This is a Bradbury Building,
Yeah.
I take it, right? Yeah. Where we get to the findings, and we're getting ready to move the penalty phase, and he was found guilty for a false statement. And we took a break. We come back up, and you can see him walking down from the 5th floor, and he just takes off and tries to get his resignation paper to personnel so he can leave and resign in lieu of.
Which is interesting, though, because there's a 5-day process from the day that the board comes back with the recommendation for termination. It's a 5-day process before that gets to the chief of police.
You're right.
So you have time to
absolutely.
to go do your thing. And in the rationale, we simply wrote that he was given an opportunity to explain to the board why he can still be a contributing member to the department, and he opted not to do that.
Wow.
The other one was an interesting one too, and that was just weird. Long story short, death investigation. It's a suicide. Guy's sister kills herself. He gets there. He's distraught. He meets with the sergeant. The sergeant's like, sorry, and help him walk through some of the stuff. Hey, can you come tell my mom? Can you help me break the news to my mom that my sister's dead? Sergeant goes, does that. Sergeant does a great job. Has no contact with this guy for over a year. During that day, though, they had some conversations about, what do you do? I've been a police officer, blah, blah, blah. What do you do for a living? And my wife's a realtor. A year later, this guy decides he's gonna do something. So he calls the sergeant up and says, hey, is your wife available to list? I want to sell my house. Is she available to list the house? And he's like, well, yeah, I guess. I mean, you're calling me. I'm not asking for any of this. And then when he meets with the wife, he calls him up and says, hey, look, I've decided I'm going to give you the house, $400,000 house. You've got a great family. You got great kids. I'm just going to give you the house. He calls some attorneys. He calls the league, calls the union, says, hey, union's like, hey, you didn't solicit it. You no contact. There's, this.
You're good to go.
You're good to go.
Yeah.
Doesn't tell his command. So a short time later, the house has now been being transferred, and the guy's ex-wife was like, hey, we were going to have that for our daughter. We were going to give her that money. And so that's where the personnel complaint comes up. So now it's like, okay, did he use his position of authority? Did he try to do all this stuff? And Sergio was on the board with me, and we said, there's some issues that should have happened. He should have made notifications, but if a guy dies and leaves you his house in his will, there's no quid pro quo. There's no expectation that you're going to get anything.
Absolutely.
Is that something we're going to fire you over?
Yeah.
And so, but one of Bratton's things was, if we order someone to a board of rights and you don't fire them, then clearly there's something you think they're good for, so they now work for you.
Yeah.
So if you go to a board of rights and you're not fired, you're going to be working for one of those captains on the board of rights.
And that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. That's those good lessons learned, man. You think it kind of looks like misconduct, but it's not, and it's a good thing you guys were able to examine everything and to really.
One of the arguments was, every Christmas we send uniformed police officers into the community to get TV sets and stereos and all kinds of stuff.
What's the difference?
Is that a quid pro quo? Are those merchants expecting something?
Yeah.
It's not like they're voluntarily saying, hey, you got a Christmas party coming up. I thought I'd send you this, this 72-inch big screen.
Yeah.
So it's like, where are we on that?
No, absolutely. Thanks a lot for that, Chief. Okay. Worst and best.
Okay, worst.
Let's go worst.
As with everybody, deaths of partners. Deaths of people I'd worked with. I was fortunate in the sense that I never had a partner who I was working with at the time, killed. But I've been to calls where people who had been my partners had been killed. And that's tough, you know, because I knew them, I knew their families. I mean, it's tough.
Yeah.
So that's worst. Best is those out of the blue moments where you made an impact and you had no idea. Two come to mind. One was about a year ago, I got an email from a kid. His name was Michael. And he says, "Hey, are you the same Rick Wall that used to work as a police officer in this area? Because I remember you," and I remember this very, and I remember this kid now too. We'd stop our car and we'd park and we'd play street football with these kids. We'd do, you know, I'm the permanent quarterback for both sides, and you know, we're playing street football. I'd toss my gun belt in the trunk of the car. I mean, I don't want somebody to get hurt, hit in the face with my gun. So, you know, and for, you know, 20 minutes one day a week, you know, we go out and play the street football.
That's awesome.
And so 20, 30 years later, he tracked me down and just said, "Hey, that was really cool, and that was one of the things that made a big impression on me, and thanks a lot." So that was one. And then another one was a guy who, when he promoted to commander on LAPD, I called him to say, "Congratulations." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You may not remember this. I was a P3 when I worked for you. And one day you came to me and said, you know, you're wasting your time here. You need to get out of this division. You need to go do something else because you have potential to be something. And if you're a P3 working a patrol car in this division, no one's ever going to know what you can do." And he says, and I was angry because, like, who are you to come and tell me that? And he goes, but I thought about that, and that became my motivation to then promote. And so ultimately passed me, and ultimately went to chief of police in one organization. Now I was a chief of police in another organization.
That is awesome.
And so those are the, and I have no recollection of that conversation, but another officer came up to me, another sergeant came up to me and said, tells me this story about something that this command officer had told him about this guy, who this sergeant, when he was young, told him, you know, got him and said, "Hey, you need to do something." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, okay." So he's told this story to other people too. So that was kind of those are the best, because you know you've made an impact not only on the department, because I believe these people that we're helping get promoted are going to benefit the department in the long run, but it helps the community and helps their families. I mean, that's what it's all about.
That's awesome. Did I leave anything out that you'd like to share? And with any parting words, look, you know, someone who's listening, watching, that wants to come on to be a police officer, what would you tell them?
You know, times have changed. You know, I came on the job, you know, 43 years ago.
Wow.
The very first thing my field training officer taught me was how to check under our cars for bombs, because they were putting bombs under our cars.
Wow.
We weren't sophisticated enough to call them IEDs. They were bombs, right? And we're not far from that now.
Yeah.
I think we're not far from that type of environment again. The difference we had was that the public support the public support us, and the politicians at least outwardly supported us.
Right.
They don't even have that nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got things going on now that it's truly tragic. And I've got a really good story. It's going to take about 2 minutes. I know you've run out of time.
It's okay. No, please.
Okay. So you may recall LAPD had something called the List of 44.
Yes.
So the List of 44, those were 44 officers who the department had determined had an excessive number of use of force complaints.
Okay.
And they were put on this list, and they basically died on that list. There's only 2 that I'm aware of that promoted.
Okay.
One made a lieutenant, and you know him. Mm-hmm. The other was a P2 who we got up to P3.
Okay. So he made field training officer.
He was field training officer. And what had happened was he was working a report car, and he was down in some area and doing taking his report and looking for something. And as he's walking back to his car, he slips and falls and breaks his foot. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, "Oh shoot, I don't want to get on the radio and put out that I'm officer down, right?" Because but the car's 3/4 of a mile away. I'm not going to make it back to my car. So he sees this woman working in her garden. So he hops up to the back fence and says, hey, can you help me? I'm a police officer. I got hurt. I hurt my foot. Can I borrow your phone? She says, yeah, sure. Come on. So she opens the gate, lets him in, sits him down in a chair. She goes into the house, comes out with her cordless phone, because this is pre-cell phone days.
Got it.
Right? Comes out with her cordless phone, a pitcher of lemonade, a glass filled with ice, an ice pack, and a pillow. And she hands him the phone. She puts his foot on a pillow, puts the ice pack on top of it, and pours him a glass of lemonade and hands that to her. And she hands it to him. And he calls and says, hey, Rick, I was the watchman. Hey, Rick.
This is what got going on.
Okay, don't make a big deal. Just can you send someone to come get me and come get my car? So, of course, I tell a sergeant, and the sergeant was responding to a downed officer. The whole world, he's sitting back with this lemonade, drinking, and all of a sudden he looks up and there's this helicopter and he hears the sirens coming. He's like, this is not what I wanted. He's off. He gets healed. He comes back, and we were talking. He says, I forgot about this, but that's who I work for. He goes, we deal with the same knuckleheads day in and day out. We deal with people that are just the worst of the worst, and we see them every single day. He goes, that was the first time that woman ever had a contact with a police officer. She lives her life like many people do. They're not breaking the law. They're not committing crimes. They love us.
Yeah.
And we get so locked up on the small group that doesn't love us.
Correct.
That we forget that that's who we work for.
Yeah.
So I walked into my captain and said, we need to make him a P3. This is exactly the guy with the right mindset that I want to be as a field training officer. And my captain went to bat for him. And it was a battle because he was on the list of 44, but he ultimately ended up getting a P3 spot. So that was one of those wins. So for the people that want to come on today and the new people that may be watching this, remember who you work for.
Yeah.
You're not working. We're working to protect those people that love us. And they are out there, folks. They love you. They care about you. That's who you work for, and that's it. That's my final parting point.
That's awesome. Rick, you know what? It's been a pleasure, man. I know you and I, we've been talking on the phone for quite some time. We have so many stories, and I thank you enough for showing up, sharing your stories, sharing your experience. Again, I believe this episode, this show, what we're trying to accomplish here, can't thank you enough for doing that. So on that note, thank you. We're going to wrap this up. Hey, like everything else, just be safe out there. And you know what? Don't forget to go Code 6.